going to tell you the story from the Grimm brothers called Grandmother's Table. Many years ago in the Black Forest, there was an old woman whose husband had passed away many years before. She was at the edge of the Black Forest, and she loved everyone. This old woman would always have an extra bed if someone needed a place to sleep. She always had an extra setting at the table if someone was hungry and needed something to eat. The old woman got by very well in this way for many years, but as time went on and she became older, her hands began to shake with the palsy, and her eyes grew dim so she could hardly see things, until the time came when she had to be taken from that lovely little home down into the city, at the edge of the city where her son lived, and move in with her son, her daughter-in-law, and her granddaughter. And at first everything was wonderful. Why, the old woman would take the granddaughter out and they would gather flowers from the fields and put them in the vase. They would play games and sing songs. But after about a month, the old woman was sitting down to breakfast, and she reached out to grab the jug of grape juice in the cut glass container, and as she reached for it, her hand hit it. Instead of grabbing it, it fell off the table, smashed, and made a mess. Grape juice everywhere. And the son, he jumped up. He said, Mother, what is wrong with you? You're always knocking things over. You're always spilling things. Be more careful. And the old woman looked down and said, I'm sorry. I will. I'll try much harder. I'll be more careful. And the son said, well, you'd better. And things were great for about 2 weeks or so. But they were sitting down to lunch one day, and the old woman, she reached out to get the bowl of mashed potatoes, and as she lifted it up towards her, it was just a bit too heavy, and she dropped it. The bowl broke in half, and mashed potatoes went all over the table. And the son jumped up. He said, Mother, again, you broke the best bowl we had. You're always breaking things. Be more careful. And the old woman, she said, I'm sorry. He said, well, we're not going to take this anymore. If you do this again, you're going to have to sit in that small table by the pantry door near the stove all by yourself. And the old woman had a tear form at the edge of her eye and said, I understand. And she tried so hard. For the next month, she was so careful. But after a month, they were sitting down to dinner. And the old woman, she lifted up her plate to put a couple pieces of meat in it. And as she did, she dropped the plate. It hit the table, knocked a glass over, and it smashed on the floor. And the daughter-in-law said, Mother, what's wrong with you? And the son, he jumped up. He said, Mother, that's it. That's it. From now on, you will sit at the small table by the pantry door near the stove by yourself. And good to his word. The next day, when the old woman came in, there was no setting at the main table. It was sitting on the small table by the pantry door near the stove. And sadly, the old woman, she shuffled across the room and sat down. Her food was brought to her. And she sat there eating, listening to the conversation and laughter at the main table. And as she ate, tears rolled down her cheeks and fell into her food, until from that day on, every meal she ate tasted of the salt of her tears. And so it went for the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But 3.5 weeks later, the old woman, she shuffled in, walked over to the small table by the pantry door near the stove, and sat down by herself, looking sad. And the son walked in, and there was their little daughter, her granddaughter, sitting on the floor with her wooden blocks. And she was taking those blocks and she was putting them together so precisely, so perfectly. The son marveled. He said, oh, honey, that's wonderful. Sweetheart, come here, look at this. He called to his wife. She came walking over, And they stood together looking at their daughter, being so careful. And she said, "That's marvelous. I've never seen her be so neat with the blocks before." And the son, he looked at the granddaughter and he said, "Sweetie, what is it you're building with those blocks?" And the little girl, she looked up at her father proudly and she said, "It's a small table, Daddy, for you and Mommy, for when you get old." And the son looked over at his mother, sitting by herself in the small table near the pantry by the stove. And humbled, he walked over and he got her and he guided her back to the table and he put her at the end of the table, a place of honor. And from that day on, she sat in that place until she passed. And if she were to knock something over or spill something, the son and daughter-in-law, they would say, "That's all right, Mother. We're just glad you're here with us." And that's the grim story of Grandmother's Table.